Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. Got a terrific episode this week. Joining me is Los Angeles-based music and rock music photographer Dustin Jack, and I'm thrilled to have him on the show. Before we get started with Justin, I'll remind you that we have a lot of good things coming up with the Maryland Photo Alliance. You can go to mdphotoalliance.org. There's contests coming up. There's lots of information, lots of events. And I think if you go back week after week, you're going to find that every time you hit that refresh, you're going to find new content added. You can also get on the email list to get the very first updates. So definitely encourage you to see what's going on. There's a lot happening. And with the weather starting to get nice, where I am in Maryland and all over the country where you have a change in seasons, it's time to get out. It's time to shoot. There's so much going on and really terrific, whether you're photographing people or street or landscapes. It's just really a great time to be out, great time to be a photographer, and encourage you to check out the website. So without further ado, want to welcome Dustin to the podcast.
Hey, Mitch. Good to see you, buddy. We've been working on this for a minute.
I know. So I became aware of your work initially through Instagram, which is where I think in modern day, so many people are aware of photographers and images and so forth. And, you know, my first introduction was with your work with Motley Crue. So, you know, maybe if you can share with the listeners, you know, when you build a rapport with a band and, you know, you build that trust factor with them, what's that like navigating it from shooting for in a concert environment or then shooting for promotional type things? You know, how do you interact with them and work with them on what they kind of hope to come from it? And then your expertise in getting them what they're looking for?
Good question. It's different in both scenarios. And you know, walking into a studio situation is obviously a lot different than shooting a concert. And I think it's more important, you know, as a fan growing up, knowing the music, or, you know, you have to at least like what you're shooting, or at least for me, like if I don't like your band, I can't really shoot you, you know, properly. Like I see it in my work if I'm not like super excited to work with you. And, you know, it's all about kind of getting that trust. And it's like those friendships that you don't really actually know how they kind of evolved or happened, and sort of that trust just starts happening. And then you collaborate a little bit. You have conversations about, you know, photography. Because I met Tommy in 1999 during the first Methods of Mayhem stuff, and then I didn't meet Nikki until about 10 years ago, probably. So there's, you know, and I'd shot Motley a couple of times for Tommy, and I'd go and shoot, you know, a couple songs here and there and I'd had Tommy in the studio, but I'd never sort of met everybody else in the band, which is kind of crazy. So when I finally met Nikki through my other good friend, DJ Ashba, we just hit it off as photographers, because he's such an enthusiast with photography, and, you know, his interests are all over the place, and he's a super creative guy. And we ended up talking for hours just about, you know, photography. We never even got into music.
Well, and a lot of times that's kind of the best, because, you know, they're musicians, you're a photographer, and you sort of have certain roles. But then when you sort of put those aside and it's just, you know, this guy talking to that guy, or this guy talking to that woman, or vice versa, it's like you're people. And then from that kind of deepens the relationship, the trust factor. And, you know, one of the things that I see in my expertise of sports photography is access is critically important. You know, there's a big difference. You know, if I was a fan and I'm shooting from the stands versus I'm in the photo well, essentially in the dugout on the field. So, you know, in your line of work, in terms of trust, in terms of access, you know, for the person listening, you know, what does that trust and that access get you, so to speak, as opposed to maybe a fan who goes to the show and they're in the fifth row, or maybe they're in the stands somewhere in the back? Maybe talk about those moments that you're able to see and capture that really makes the difference between kind of a fan photo and then a professional who has that access and that trust?
I mean, the access is obviously everything. And I've been so, fortunate in my career that, meeting somebody like Tommy Lee early in my life. And, once, I photographed him once or twice, and I was in the studio with him for almost, I think, 3 months for that first thing. Like it was a random meeting. I was working at an auction house, long story short, and he came in and we just started chatting, and he's like, "Hey, I'm, making a record right up the street. You know, yeah, what do you do here?" I'm like, take pictures for these catalogs. I worked on like the Elvis sale and like a bunch of, crazy stuff in the auction world. It's like, "Oh, you got a book? Like, bring it up." And he left, and I was like, "Well, I just met my hero, so if I never hear from him again, I can die." And they ended up calling me, and I took my book up, and we went over some stuff. I think I took a Linda McCartney book with me, like, if I'm going to be in the studio, this is kind of what I would want to do with you. And he's like, "Done." And basically, I after work every day for a couple of months, I went up while he was recording in the studio with all the crazy guest stars that were on that record, and I was just basically a fly on the wall. So having access like that, we kind of got to know each other and having smoke breaks and just kind of being bros, and that kind of just turned into that, letting me kind of have access or show sides of him that that are a little more vulnerable, just stuff that you wouldn't normally see. And he was in a transitional period at that time too. He was doing something totally different, and he let me kind of just do whatever I wanted. And that's back in the days where like I was processing film every night in the morning, and I was printing all my own stuff. So I was shooting a lot of black and white. I was shooting a lot with my Hasselblad. I had a 35 millimeter, but I was also shooting with the 4x5. I put a 4x5 in the studio and did a portrait of him, like of his back with, big piece of sheet film. That's one of my favorite shots. And yeah, just the access turned into like a friendship. And then that turned into, that kind of just steamrolled. And it was weird because I'd sort of lost my love for kind of what I was doing for a minute. Like it became a job with like the auction world. Like it was production. Like I was a photographer, and I was a working photographer, and I was stoked, but I wasn't like shooting music, and like I wasn't, I knew that I loved doing it, but I kind of just lost my lust for that kind of that angle. And my best friend ended up getting the guitar job in Daughtry. And when he started going, he'd be in LA and doing stuff with Chris, and Chris was just the coolest, the American Idol, Chris Daughtry. And, getting to photograph literally his first live show at the Viper Room to stuff at the Wiltern. And, that just kind of lit my fire again. And I think at that time, it's probably shooting like a D1X with me. I think I had a 60 macro because that's what I was using for like jewelry stuff and work. I didn't even have like a concert kit or anything anymore. I didn't have really my own, like I have all my old film cameras, but, I was, trying to transition and do stuff digital. But I think I got some knockoff, 24 to 210 to, 5.6 or some horrible lens that, just looks absolutely horrible. And I think those files, that D1, I think the max file was not even a megabyte or something. I mean, it was some ridiculous small digital file, and then trying to edit those and stretch them and, turn those into something back then was kind of crazy.
It's funny you mentioned kind of like an off-brand lens or whatever. I remember just a million years ago, I bought a Vivitar lens and a Quantaray lens, and but it didn't even matter because it was a 75 to 300, and it was the longest lens I had. And I didn't know from Nikon, Canon, Sony was just not even there, and some of these other brands. So, well, let me ask you a question. You brought up something that I don't think I've actually asked a guest, but you sort of touched on it. You mentioned with Tommy, you met him and you're like, oh God, this is like a music hero. I can die now. And then it evolves to become, friendship, relationship, et cetera. So my question is, a lot of people listening are probably thinking, wow, if I had the opportunity to photograph my hero, whoever that is, I'd be so nervous. What would I do? I'd probably forget how to turn the camera on. So I guess in your context, you meet him, you guys build a relationship, etc. But for the next person you met, that was, this iconic whoever. For you as a professional, when did you globally sort of transition from, oh, wow, I can't believe I'm shooting so and so, to, oh, really cool, I'm shooting them. This is my expertise. Let me do my thing now, where that confidence kind of overrode the, oh, wow factor of who I'm shooting, and you were focused on making great images? When did that kind of turn the corner?
I mean, probably right around. See, we'll circle back for 2 seconds. As an 11-year-old, kid playing drums, like Tommy Lee was my absolute number one of all time. Like, I could have lost my mind, like learning how to just play like him. And I remember being a kid going, if I could just meet him, I know, like, you have those dreams where you're like, oh, if I was just in a room with him for 5 minutes, I know we would, it was
we'd hit it off. We'd be buddies. Yeah.
And then, and it still like blows my mind. It's so surreal that happened. And then, sorry, remind me your.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about.
No, I know.
Yeah.
So by the time I met Tommy, going back again, like I was always in bands in San Diego County, like, so I would always have my camera. So I would shoot the bands that we were playing with. So I was always kind of a music photographer. And then, I get this job, at the auction house, and I'd been there for 6 or 7 years at that point. So I was very comfortable with my skill set, as far as camera operations and knowing how to manually, just dig in and be able to manipulate and all that stuff. Especially like shooting film, like I told you, probably spent 3,000 hours in the dark room printing and processing film. And like the first 3 years I was at the auction house, that was my job. I was the darkroom tech. So I literally for 3 years spent every day in the darkroom. So, it really, by the time I met Tommy, I was very confident in what I could do and what I knew. And it was about adapting that to the situation. And the situation was, my 11-year-old self is shitting my pants every time I, walk into the room with him. It was really like, it was pretty crazy. And there's been a few times in my life where, anxiety is too small of a word. You're taking on some of these big jobs and you're in charge of a lot of people and a lot of money and a lot of moving parts and band members and egos and, just vision. And like, you have to compile all this thing into one sort of day and projection and be confident. And like, if you're freaking out inside, you better not let anybody know. But believe me, I was freaking out inside. Yeah.
I remember I heard a story that Dave Grohl told where he became friendly with Paul McCartney, and Paul McCartney came over to his home for dinner, and he said he went into his kitchen and he said to his wife, Paul McCartney's in our dining room, and
but you're Dave Grohl.
Right. And then at some point, I guess one of his kids took a liking to Paul McCartney, and it was bedtime. And the gist of it is that this little child asked if Paul McCartney could like sing her little bedtime like nursery song that like Dave or his wife would sing, and he was like, sure. And then Dave to his wife was like, Paul McCartney is singing our daughter, but it was like, here's this iconic musician, Dave Grohl, and he's just, losing his mind, in that context. So, in terms of LA, so I lived in LA for about 3 years, and I lived there during a period of time in the middle 90s ish, where, you had the Viper Room, the Whiskey, the Rainbow, all these places. So, I'm thinking to myself that if I was an aspiring music photographer, other than or in addition to like New York or maybe Nashville, if country is your thing or whatever, LA must be mind blowing, especially when you're an up and coming music photographer. It just seems like, it's limitless. So what was that like early days for you? And maybe even now, was it like you're shooting all the time, or how did that go in terms of frequency and job opportunities and all that?
Yeah. I mean, it was for me a little different. I kind of got to cut the line a little bit with some of that stuff because I had a working day job. Like I was a working photographer in the daytime. So I wasn't out there like, trying to, I still don't know how to get a hold of press and like how to, get certain photo passes and stuff like that, because it's just never been how I've had to work. I've been so lucky with the people I work with, like the Chris Daughtry is my, my one of my best friends, Phil X, had a couple of bands in LA. So we, he this is pre Bon Jovi, and he's selling out the Key Club and all these places back then, and he would just let me go practice, and give me full reign to shoot whatever I wanted. So I had stage access, side stage access, and stuff like that. Most of my career, and not that, I mean, there's the three song rule is crazy, and it's a hard beast, because you got 25 people in a line, and how do you got to separate yourself from them with one shot. And how do you do that? It's and that was always my goal. Like, how can I be different? How can my stuff be recognizable in a line of 20 people that we're all shooting the same moment? And if you're going to line them up, how are you going to go, I know whose that is? And that was always my goal, and I think that's where my editing style came into play, and like all that stuff too.
So for those who are listening who are unfamiliar with the world of concert photography, maybe you can explain not only the 3-song rule, but just kind of share any other of those kind of restrictions that we might call standard or oddball that you've seen or heard about, in your time shooting.
Yeah, I mean, the early stuff, late 90s. Yeah. You could kind of go do a show, and you wouldn't get like a huge release that you would have to sign, and going through publicity or whatever it is, and the 3-song rule is basically, a lot of times with photographers, if you're working the press, you basically get ushered down. You get to shoot the first 3 songs, and you're ushered out, and not only out of the photo pit, but usually out of the building. Like you don't get to like hang out and enjoy the show after those 3 songs. Like you work your ass off for about 15 minutes, and that's it. And if you're lucky, you get to watch the show, and sometimes you got to do that. And you had to kind of go into it knowing that the work is going to be, hit it and quit it, and you better be on your game. And, like I said, like, what are you going to do to make yourself stand out in a line of, 25 photographers that are, trying to get the same shot, stepping on your feet. And there's, the etiquette, and then there's the non-etiquette photo pits. And, if you've been part of one, that it can get a little cheeky sometimes. I think for the most part, I've always had really good luck with like Photo Pit and other guys, and especially with like my access with, like, say I'm shooting with Zakk Wylde or Black Label or something, and I know I have the whole show to shoot. I'll stay out of the pit for the first 3, and because like, what am I going to do? I'm going to crowd these guys, like let these guys that are working their ass off, let them get their shot. I can always, I can sneak down there after they're gone. So, just kind of with that kind of stuff is, I've always been lucky.
Yeah. When I've shot concerts, I always think, can I possibly get a shot that doesn't have the microphone in front of the lead singer's face? So, I could write a whole book of like all these great entertainers, and it's just literally about 20% of their face. It's their ears on either side of the microphone. But it is kind of
cutting off a headstock, or like,
right.
like you get that perfect guitar shot, you lop off the headstock. I mean, sometimes you frame it like that, and sometimes you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I missed it.
And it's kind of like, I mean, when you have been in there for the first 3, it's almost like like a mosh pit in the photo, area half the time. And, I can't even.
And adrenaline's crazy. Like it's crazy. Like you get a full like anxiety rush, and it's intense. Like when the curtain drops, and it's game on for you. Like like we kind of discussed earlier, you haven't lived until you screwed up somebody's wedding.
Oh my
And the
God.
same thing with a shoot like that with a band, and you haven't lived until you botched one of those up, and like, your camera's not pulling focus or something, you're not checking enough, or you left your ISO cranked or something crazy happened, and you're like, I didn't bother to look at the back of my camera, and like everything's blown out, and
Oh yeah.
like that kind of stuff, and it's happened.
And it's funny because when we're shooting, we're not performing in the way that the band is. But if you've ever stood in front of a speaker and the bass is booming, I mean, you feel it in your chest to where you think you might have a
Oh yeah.
heart attack. I mean, it's intense. You've got fans screaming, leaning over you sometimes, spilling beer on you more times than a few.
Pushing you out of the way, spitting at
Absolutely.
you, like all kinds of crazy stuff is happening.
Security is bringing people over the barricade and then ushering them out. I can't even, I mean, this because you live it, but it is not a pristine operating room in front of that stage, even though there's
No,
a barrier there.
Yeah, the first thing you do is introduce yourself to the security guys, because they're going to be your best friend, and
Right?
and some of them are great, and I've had run-ins with some guys that want to make an example of you. It's not always fun. I'll put it
Yeah.
that way. I've been pushed out of the way a few times and like manhandled. I'm like, dude, you probably shouldn't touch me. Like,
Yeah.
this is a problem. I'm carrying $10,000 worth of gear, and you're basically got me in a chokehold.
Right. Right.
Like,
That never ends well. So would you say that your introduction, or I don't know if it was a chance meeting, but your meeting with Tommy, if we were to call something a big break, would you say that was kind of your big break?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I guess my first real big break is just being a working photographer. And I grew up in San Diego, and I was working for a guy that had a vintage movie poster restoration company, right? So I was one of the two people that shot the world record Frankenstein one sheet that sold for $200,000 in 93 or 4 or something like that. At the time, it was the world record, and like fell in love with vintage movie posters. And like, when I wasn't shooting them, we were shooting all large format. Everything was 4x5 and transparencies back then. And then he would give me the opportunity that if I had downtime to like sort of mask and work on the poster. So I'm cutting acetate and cutting mask for airbrushers and like all that stuff. So it kind of feeds into like the layer building that you do in Photoshop, and seeing how to cut a mask in negative space, and like, working your brain on different things like that. And then also being able to photograph all that stuff. Fell in love with memorabilia and movie posters. And then, so I moved to LA, and I lived in LA for maybe a week, and I moved in with my best friend, and I'm right on Stanley and Sunset.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
but Butterfield is at the top of the street.
Yeah, where it is.
And
yeah.
I walked in there, and I said, hey, I'm a photographer. I've actually indirectly worked for you. I work for the guy in San Diego, and we send transparency to you for the auction catalogs of these movie posters, yada yada. And they basically said, well, yeah, we don't have anything in the photography department open, but we got a spot for a crew member. So I spent the first 3.5, 4 months at Butterfield's loading trucks, and just hustling, and labor hard, just moving pianos, moving armoires, moving. How many people know about Louis XV furniture, like and then lo and behold, a few months later, one of the guys in the photo department left, and they just promoted me, and that's when I started doing I was the darkroom tech. So I took over for somebody else, and he went up, so he became my manager, and then I spent the next 7 years there, and it was every day you're shooting the Sanford and Son truck, or the world's largest star sapphire, or Elvis's jumpsuit, or ET's hand from some scene, like just
The craziest stuff.
And you learn how to light things very quickly and precisely and move on. And that's kind of where my studio experience came from is kind of with memorabilia and shooting furniture and just weird historical documents, meteors. I mean, name it. I've photographed. I've once had to photograph a swatch of Abraham Lincoln's hair that was clipped from his temple after he was shot.
Okay.
With, and it literally says a hair of A. Lincoln with brain matter.
Oh, wow.
And wrapped up in this parchment paper. And it was one of the doctors clipped a swatch of hair. And I opened this thing and I go, I mean, you could clone Lincoln right now. I mean,
right. Exactly.
Like, that is crazy.
Well, so to set up this thought or question I have, which bands in your career have you toured with and been a tour photographer, either for the whole tour or part of the tour? I just want to give people kind of a flavor for just the variety of people that you've worked with from a tour standpoint.
Yeah, I've never been. I mean, I'm not like a long term. I'm not on the road for like 3-4 months at a time. I'll go out for, a little push or a run here and there. But I met Zakk Wylde about 10 years ago and started working with him very closely. And he's one of the few people that has given me just complete creative control about anything that we do. He's like, he just basically says, you know the shots I want, do what you got to do to get them. And having that access with him has changed it. That was probably my second biggest break, is working with Zakk. And he just, all access, doesn't matter. He'll let me, I'm surprised I haven't been hit in the face with his headstock, because I've photographed him with a 10.5 millimeter wide angle, about that close from the headstock. So it just completely bends, right? So I'm up on him like over the top, and he's Zakk, and it you have to. I'm really surprised that I haven't broken a nose or had a bloody lip. But
when you're shooting a show like that and you're out of town with a band for, some kind of a push or, a swing through a state or whatever it is, are you shooting typically the sound check and the show, or just the show?
Depends. Sound check, there's not really much going on, because they're not really testing lights or anything, but you get some cool candid moments and stuff like that, which I do like. Backstage, when they're getting ready is kind of a more my thing, a little more fly on the wall kind of thing. And then the show itself, I mean, you as a sports photographer, it's very similar. Like, the magic is happening on the field. You're just there to make sure everybody sees it, So my job is just to get a moment. And I always tell, like, even younger kids up and coming, you don't go to cover an event, shoot for one moment. If you get one shot that tells the story, then you win. You don't need 50 shots. You need one that is just that perfect shot. And a lot of times now I know it when I see it in camera. Yeah. So, like, I'll go home and I'm looking specifically for, I'm scrolling, like, I know where that was. Like, you're looking for that one moment that you got when you saw it. Yeah. And you also have to, I'm sure you know this too, you have to not just look through the camera the whole time. You have to see it with your eyes. So you have to put the camera down and watch what's going on, because there's all kinds of peripheral going on. And I think, growing up a musician, being a drummer, sort of changes, sitting behind some great musicians in my life. As a drummer, you have to watch all the time. All those cues, everything, a glance over the shoulder, that all means something that's happening on stage. So you have to kind of drop the camera every once in a while and just scan with your real eyes. And then, then you go back for the moment. But, you kind of anticipate, the music that you're shooting, hopefully well enough that you kind of know where you want to be, where they're going to be on stage. If you're going to shoot a solo, or if you're going to shoot a bass player in the back, you just kind of, position yourself to get, that shot and then move on.
And that kind of ties in with something that I was just thinking about. And that is, whatever you're shooting, especially if it's a moving subject, knowing your subject knowing its tendencies, knowing kind of they do this, then they tend to do that. So when you're shooting bands that you're very familiar with, and you're anticipating based on knowledge, you've shot 6 shows, 10 shows, um, having that anticipation to be ready before the moment, for the moment, how much of that awareness that you have do you think results in really strong images versus seeing it for the first time in that moment, which is sometimes too late to capture it because you just saw it, but the moment is gone. How much of a role does that experience with an artist play in getting?
I think it gets you in the ballpark.
Okay.
So you have a general idea of kind of what you're looking for, and then every night, every time you shoot, it's a surprise shot. There's always something that happens where you're like, God, I was so lucky to get that. Was perfect timing. I was in the right spot, like that great moment, that expression or whatever it is, and so you get a little of both. You get the one that you were set up to shoot, and then you also get that sort of magic moment that you didn't expect. And it changes every night. I mean, no show is ever the same. It's like shooting a baseball game. Like you're never going to see the same game twice ever.
It's always different. For those people listening who shoot things like architecture, street photography, et cetera, the light can change, but it's more the same than it's not. When you're shooting a rock show, especially, you've got pyro, you've got, all sorts of lights going, different color lights, et cetera. So I'm sure a question that I'm going to get, and you may have had it before, is how do you make sure your exposure is the right exposure when the light can be changing literally second to second? And for those of you,
mean something like that?
Yeah. Dustin's holding up a picture of just pyro on a stage. It's a double page spread. And I mean, it's just an explosion and everything. The exposure is correct. So is that an auto exposure thing, or do you just know what you need to have and you set it before the moment?
No, the trick, pyro is definitely trickier than just regular stage lighting, stuff like that. Like when I did the final show for Motley Crue, the first final show at Staples on New Year's Eve, and that's when Nikki was coming out with the flamethrower, and I knew I wanted to get the flamethrower. Like I knew like that was it's during Shout at the Devil, and he's it's a 20-foot flame that he blows off of his base. It just this big gas of fireball, right? And so I'm probably at, I don't know, my setting's probably somewhere around 2000 ISO. I try to keep as low as possible on that sort of stuff. Shutter speed probably around, I don't know, 3 to 5 somewhere. Okay. And so, but when the flamethrower is not going on, it's pretty dark stage and it's basic stage lighting. So I'm down at 2.8, 3.5, and then the flamethrower goes off and you're up to 22. Like, so it's like so in its increment. So it's like, so you're shooting the upbeat and the downbeat, and it's literally like, right, like you're slamming your aperture back and forth because you have to open all the way up when the flamethrower is not going off. Right. And then you have to adjust your shutter speed and your aperture. You need a faster shutter speed, and f/22 is paramount because it is going to blow out. No question. So you have to know your settings. You have to know your camera. You have to know manually like what you're doing. I've never shot anything that wasn't on like a manual setting.
Yeah. Now, when
there's auto ISO, there's some auto ISO stuff that people are doing that is pretty crazy. Yeah. And I mean, it's just not for me. But I just always try to know my equipment, backwards and forwards. It's funny. I have an aversion, as a lot of people do, to reading the instructions. but that said, you don't need to read the instructions to know your equipment, but you better know your equipment, especially if you're being hired to shoot something. You better know what every button that you need to know can do. Otherwise, are you Nikon shooter? Or are you Canon? You know what? For sports and wildlife, I'm Sony. Mirrorless. I left Canon about 5 years ago. I was with Canon 20 something years, and then I became Sony for sports and wildlife, and then when I do a lot of street photography, Leica. So I've just got more rangefinder stuff. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was going to say, like, when I get my if I get a new body, if get a Nikon, and the book is about yank this.
Yes. Yes.
I'm the guy that reads every page. Like,
Oh man.
just like, I got to know, like, what's the limit?
Yeah.
How far can I push this camera? Like, and in a moment's notice, can I completely downshift and flip a 180 in a moment's notice and know the camera well enough to, like, hit the brakes, turn around, and restart as a different guy with a different, almost a different camera. So knowing your settings that well is that important.
Well, for the gearheads who are listening, and this is always a question, when you get ready to leave the house or the hotel to shoot a show, what kind of setup do you have? What kind of gear, camera bodies, and lenses do you typically use?
I mean, your basic rig, I would say, you should have a 24 to 70 and a 70 to 200, like as your standard go-to. And you can get away with almost everything with those. And then everything else is sort of candy sprinkles. So I have a 14 to 24 that is pretty spectacular, nice bend on that lens. I have a 10.5 that I take with me. I have I was manually hand holding a 300 millimeter when I was on tour with Bon Jovi.
Okay.
And from the crowd. So I had the 300 hanging on my neck, and then I had two cameras on my harness. So I had three on me, and then I had one remote on the stage that was tied to probably my 70 to 200. So every time I would fire the 70-200, it was taking a mirror shot from the drum set back at me. So you would get the front and back of those shots. So, but talk about having a bad back after, carrying a 300 around for 2 weeks and like manually holding that thing for 3 hours a night was beefy.
I was shooting PGA golf once, and I get to the course with my 400 2.8, and I realized I forgot my monopod. So I handheld that for, oh my God. It became the gun show. I mean, it was like a workout, like I was doing curls.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So no,
no monopod. Like I was hand holding too. I was with that 300. It was the same. Like there was no, like, cause you're all over I was all over the floor. Like there's no way I could take a monopod out there with me. And It was literally like, you drop the 300, grab the 24-70, and you're this close, and you're back up, and 70. Then you get that super crisp, tight shot of John with the 300, and like you realize that the guy's got the bluest eyes you've ever seen in your life, and you never noticed before, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I just picked up Sony has a 300 2.8 that weighs essentially what a 70 to 200 weighs. So I handhold that now for baseball. And it's, I mean, there's, like anything, there's times for a 600, a 400, a 300, whatever. But in Baltimore, the distance between the photo wells and home plate, the 300 is the perfect length. But to be able to handhold comfortably, bold, underline and bold comfortably, to be able to handhold some lenses because they're weighing like 2 pounds is it's a gift.
Yeah, my 300 is probably 10 years old, so it's a barrel. It's a big piece of glass.
Yeah, it's a camera and it's a weapon. Yeah.
I mean, and it's heavy, and that kind of stuff.
I bet. So now that you've been doing what you've been doing for as long as you have, how would you say either your eye has changed or your composition has changed, or maybe the better question is, what has changed for you, not even like as an industry, et cetera, but how you shoot? Is there much that has evolved as time has gone on?
I think so. Like certainly the equipment has changed, and my experience has changed, which changes the way I shoot. It never gets old, and it never is not exciting. And I never not have stage fright before I shoot a show. And it's like, it feels like I'm performing, I get that rush and that anxiety. Like I do get stage fright sometimes. And my wife she's like, I know you're not going to sit down for an hour, but you're driving me crazy. Like, because it's manic, the prep in your head and your bag, and you got, are you set up, or, did you get everything you need, or you got batteries? Like, there's 3,000 moving parts in that bag, and you got your reputation on the line, and you're shooting a band like Motley Crue or whoever, and it's not the one you want to screw up, So
Yeah, we've talked a bit about Motley Crue and about Nikki and those guys. So one question that comes to mind is, with Nikki Sixx being one of the band and also an avid photographer. So my question is, when you're working for a band where one or more of the members is a photographer themselves and has real interest in it, how does it, or how does it kind of not only evolve your relationship with them, but kind of evolve the collaboration with them?
I mean, it's been a real bonding thing with me and him specifically. Like I said, I met him through DJ Ashba, who was in 6 a.m. And the stuff that we were doing together is like, very creative. And, is, for lack of a better word, I was kind of in a crunchy era of my editing and work, where I was, trying to do where it looked like a color plate, kind of 4x5, stained film look, that kind of stuff. And Nikki kind of took a liking to the stuff I was doing with DJ, and asked DJ to introduce. So I went over there, and literally we just started talking about photography, and it just never stopped. And he's one of those guys, like, just super collaborative and very part of the conversation. And it's never like, hey, you should do it like this. It's like, oh, what if we did this? What do you think? And then, more often than not, he'll defer to me and be like, just, he gets excited about it, and he wants the best images. And I've spent a lot of time with him editing. So, I've sat side by side with him and worked with him in Lightroom, and just kind of getting him sharp, because he's a really good editor. He's a great shooter, but he has a thirst for knowledge, and, like, especially if he was not familiar with a certain editing style, he's not afraid to be like, dude, I really want to know how to do, like, can you show me? And that makes it really cool. And it's the same with actually, having him in the studio and shooting with him. It's very collaborative like that. He's part of the day. It's not like my show, and he's just there to model for me. It's definitely for every shoot I've ever done with him or the band has been, very cool like that, where, he's so encouraging and very generous.
Well, it's cool because, we've all heard of and maybe been through those experiences where, you have 10 minutes to shoot somebody, which, at about the 3-minute mark, you feel like you're living on borrowed time. Whereas if you've got somebody you're collaborating with, they understand there's a certain amount of time that it takes to do the job right. And they want the job right because it represents themselves. So you're going to get the time that's needed. You may even get more time because, they realize an extra 20 minutes is going to get better results than 20 minutes less. So I can see how that collaboration, it's just, it results in a better finished product. So
I mean, the studio experience too is different than the backstage experience. Like, if we're specifically going in the studio to work with him, or somebody that it's more like I said, when you shoot a show, the magic is happening and you're there to capture it. When you're in the studio, you kind of have to create the magic. You have to build it from the bottom up with lighting or backdrops, whatever the situation or scenario that you're trying to get out of it. So it's two very different animals. And like the last time that Nikki and I did the show, we did it at Funny Farm at his place here in California, and we did half a day in the studio, and we were just like, fuck, let's jump outside. There's this massive oak tree right down here, and I got my new bass light. And so we went out there, and so Nikki is probably 2 inches in the frame, and this tree is the rest of the, if it's 8x10, but he's got his bass, and I had a remote light. I can't think I was using pro photo stuff. So I could trigger the light, and I had my brother was my assistant on that one, and he had his 400 millimeter with him. So I'm shooting from about 200 yards away to get the whole tree and Nicky this big, and firing that pro photo at him. And it just, one of those magic shots where you're like, yeah, I never saw that one coming.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, that one you can actually see on my website. I'll give you like the links to that stuff, so you could see that shot. It's pretty cool.
But when you're shooting a show, a live show, and the show's an hour and a half, give or take, how long are you spending? Would you just estimate editing? The whole take, or even given images, just to try to give a sense for it's not over when you leave the show by any stretch.
Probably 10 hours to one.
Yeah.
For 1 hour, for every 1 hour you shoot, I probably edit for 10.
And what would you say, we all kind of have, to an extent, like a formula, I'm going to shoot it, and then I'm going to look at the images, and here's like the first 3 things I kind of know I'm going to do. And then it's image by image based on whatever it needs, or the final look I'm looking for. What are some of those things that you find yourself doing from an editing standpoint that are like, yep, tried and true, I'm always going to do this, and then sometimes I'm going to do these other things? What are some of those in editing that you tend to look for?
You mean like technically with within Photoshop, or like plugins, or because
either.
There's different stuff, but there's still like, I shot so many frames on the Bon Jovi tour that I'm still finding stuff that I'm like, oh my God, how did I miss that? Or it's insane how much you accumulate, tens of thousands of images. I think I shot, I don't even know what it was. Those 8 shows, it was like 20,000 shots with 4 cameras, or like something crazy, and so trying to keep track of cards and just getting them loaded into a hard drive so you can get it into Lightroom, so you can actually dig into it a little bit. I do a lot of heavy lifting in Lightroom, and then I'll finish in Photoshop, but then I'll usually go back into Lightroom and double edit on the backside. After Photoshop, I'll go back into Lightroom and re-edit the image again. So you get it to a certain point where, I like to think of each image almost as its own sort of painting. If, like I would like for anything that people see of mine, that I would hope that it would stand on its own, as its own piece of art, right? So when it comes to editing, there's not a minimum or a maximum amount of time. I've spent hours on a single image. Hours and hours. I think when we did the promo shot with the Def Leppard Motley Crue thing, and I did a composite in a stadium, and I think there was 130 layers or something crazy just on that one image, and the massive file size was just, I couldn't even tell you how big they were. You have to save it as a completely different file type because it was massive, and you can't flatten things like that. And it was just like every little detail. And then everybody, then you got 4, 5, 6, 9 guys that want changes. So yeah.
So from a backup standpoint, how many different ways do you back up these images just to make sure, if your local backup, dies?
Probably not well enough, but every drive I have has a mirror.
Now, do you do offsite as well, or just local?
No, and I should. I definitely would look into that. Yeah, at this point, the catalog is so big that I don't even know what to do with it all anymore. There's just so much. There's drives that, it's crazy. It's crazy how many images I have. I'll go through, it says, Lita Ford, Faster Pussycat, I used to be able to read before my eyes went crap, but I had put labels on a couple of my drives, and the font size was probably like 6 or something. And I remember when I printed that out, I could read it, and now I can't anymore.
Yeah, I can relate to that because, now next to my laptop, as soon as I upload images, the reading glasses go on immediately. Otherwise, I'm no good.
I mean, I can't even see you right now.
You know what? Not seeing me clearly is probably the best gift you could give to yourself. Not seeing me
Same, same.
very, very clearly.
I'll extend you the same courtesy.
So, photographically, I guess, did you have any mentors or did you have any photographers, music or otherwise, that you kind of either wanted to emulate or you just thought, wow, I'd love to make pictures of that quality or with that kind of insight? Or were there any of those folks out
Yeah,
there?
I mean, all of the Ross Halfins and the Zlozauers, like all the great guys of growing up and reading all the album art and the liner notes and all the killer album art that we grew up with and all that stuff. But for me, photography was a way to get out, man. I grew up just very I was in a tough spot, just a poor kid from San Diego, and I started just reading every book I could get my hands on when I was probably like 11 or 12, and started, processing film in the bathroom and like the cliche, like, putting a dark room in the bathroom kind of stuff. And, so it's all I've ever actually done, and that started like I was probably like 12 or 13, maybe, when I really kind of started mixing chemistry and, printing. And I had like it's called a day lab. But back in the day, you could sort of print on the tabletop with these kind of blackout trays. You have a black box, so you could load film.
Yep, yep. I
That,
remember that.
and then you could kind of turn this thing, and the enlarger had just basically a window on it, so you could find focus. Then you'd pull the tray out, and you'd preload a paper in the tray, make your exposure, flip the tray back off, and then the actual enlarger would come off the tray, and then you would have little chemistry bottles that you could kind of pour it in, and you're developing. You can't see it develop. It's completely in this little box, but you're changing the chemistry, and then you finally get to the fixer, and you can open it up and see how horrible of a job you did.
One thing that I was asked that resonated with me by a friend. He said, "Is it the act of making pictures, composing and pushing that shutter that really drives you, or is it the finished product, the finished picture?" So for you, which would you say it is?
It's all one. You can't do one without the other, and if you're going to be good at it, you better know both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. A friend of mine, who's been shooting at a very high level for more than 5 decades. We were talking about pictures, and he said the difference between a professional and an amateur photographer is that an amateur can make a fantastic picture, but a pro can make one almost every time. And it's the consistency. He said to me, and there's a little bit of cockiness to him, but he's published 111 books now. He said, I know pretty close to what the final image is going to look like before I push the shutter. And it's just,
I agree with that.
And it's just, what's that expression? You're not cocky if you can back it up. And so, it's just, I find for me, and maybe this
cocky and arrogance are not the same as being confident, though.
Yeah. Like for example, when I'm doing street photography, I love just being on the street, like call it the hunt. I love being out in the air. I'm in New York City. Where's the light? Where's the shadow? Where's the reflections coming off of a big puddle, and it's got a building in it. And I'm like, I can't wait for that person to walk through it. Or if it's
but you have the ability to make something out of nothing.
Yeah.
This is that's the artist side of you. You could walk out of your front door right now and probably find something that would, you could create something magical about almost anything, because that's the artist side of it, and that's what keeps me shooting, just it never changes. And, knowing that you have a skill that you enjoy, but you have developed your eye and you've put in your time, and that's the special part of it, and I using the word cocky because I probably would be accused of that from time to time. But like I said, the confidence level is different than arrogance or, cockiness or, and just being able to use the tools and create something, and, there's some time, I don't know, a few years ago, everybody was kind of bashing, oh my God, it's totally Photoshop. I'm like, yeah, like, what the fuck do you think it? Yeah. They're like, dude, the plugins. I'm like, if the tools are available, why am I going to dig a ditch with a toothbrush if you have a shovel?
Yes.
Like, give me a break. Like, it makes no sense. Like, and all the guys that are bashing the post-processing, I'm like, listen, you use the tools that are available to you. And if you use them improperly, you're going to hear about it. And like you, I'm sure, you practice, and there's stuff that I'm embarrassed of, like, oh my God. Like, but you go through these phases, and you're using the tools that are available and that to get to that result. And then, today you look back and you're like, wow, maybe that wasn't the result, but that was part of the learning process, and it is what it is. There's nothing I would take back. There's stuff I cringe a little bit, but it's all part of the getting here. Every single frame that you take is a different step to where you are today. Like, every time you click the shutter is basically a footstep in the path that leads you to sitting here with you today.
Well, you used the term earlier that before every show you get stage fright. And what I'm going to ask you to kind of explain to the listeners is, when you're in position to shoot a show, and like everyone who's at the show, they're playing some recorded music and everybody's getting their drinks, getting to their seat, and then they start to dim the lights. And you're in position, the lights are out, and you can see the band making their way in the dark on the stage. And that in, Motley Crue's case, could be Tommy's about to hit the drum or somebody's about to hit that first guitar note. As that's about to happen, I mean, are you basically like vibrating? Like, you're just like, it's about to happen. Like, what's that energy like for you when it's literally a half a beat away from, the next hour and a half of you being full speed motion?
I mean, at that point, I think is like everything's out the window at that point. That's where it ends. Like, your anticipation, your anxiety, all that stuff is dead right at that moment. And like, for me, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but yeah, it's basically what happens to me is my ears stop working. And I'm just laser focused on the visual. Like, that's where knowing the music very well comes into play. Like, you don't have to listen to it if you're, what I mean? Yeah. If you hear it, you don't have to listen, but my ears don't really work when I'm working.
Yeah.
And
you're sent. I mean, you can only, you talk about a person like a blind person, their hearing is going to be amazing. And then, so when you're really focused visually, I don't know if you can be hyper focused visually and also equally as focused from a listening standpoint, because you're so focused. So I know.
And you're not there to enjoy the show,
right? Per
se.
Right.
I mean, you are, but you're not there to listen.
That's not the goal. The goal is not listening. Yeah. The goal is so my question is, if I am, especially if I'm out, in Africa, in the bush somewhere, I'm looking for these little moments to hone in. I'm looking for, if I'm photographing a jaguar, I'm looking for a turn of the head. I'm looking for if I see leaves rustling, I am so focused on those leaves, because the second those eyes peer through, I want
you get that sparkle.
So in your field of expertise, how are you? I mean, you've got, in the average band that's got a drummer, a lead singer, bass player, guitarist, maybe two, maybe dancers. How are you looking for moments amidst all of these potential places that moments can arise? How are you, like a computer, like a supercomputer? You're sort of like hyper analyzing what's about to happen, what could happen, what do I know that happened last show, but what if this happens? Like, how are you processing all this? Because you're looking for moments. You know, some moments are like, okay, he's going to leap up and I want to get him at like Pete Townsend. I want to get him when his legs are completely spread out, you know, when he's about to hit that note on the guitar. But how are you deciding where to look for those moments first? Because there's so many potential places.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, using your eyes comes into play. Like, putting the lens down for a second and observe, like, take it in, take inventory of what's on stage, where they are, and then you can bring the camera back up and find the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be aware of 70 moving parts. And so when you bring your camera back up, you kind of, and it's not a methodical thing that I do where I'm like, I started the bass player and then I moved to the drummer. It's a constant change. And it also goes back to knowing your settings, because if you're going, from the bass player to the drum riser and up to the singer, like, those three cameras or those lenses and those settings, are all going to be different. Every the drummer's lit differently than the lead singer, and all that stuff. So you have to kind of know instinctively where your settings are going to go when, as you're moving across the stage, you're adjusting because you've paid attention to where the lights are hitting, if they're in sync, or if they're a spotlight, or if they're strobing, or all that stuff. So it's a constant battle within yourself to try to find the moment, and sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you nail it and sometimes you miss it completely.
There's so much going on the stage, whether it is other band members, it's equipment, it's wires, it's scaffolding. So how much attention do you pay to backgrounds in your composition? Or is it, look, I can't worry about backgrounds, I'll be at.
No, as much as possible.
Okay.
So yeah, all of it, being in a stadium situation and being on the drum riser behind a drummer and using the crowd and using that peripheral, and even just the way you frame it. If you want to frame the drummer lower and like to get the entire stadium background, or are you going to go right behind his head and try to get reaction of crowd, or like, so you're constantly looking for things that you've never seen before,
Which is so challenging because, never have we had as much imagery going past our eyes as probably in present day. So, I guess from a standpoint of style, if somebody said, oh, that's obvious, that's a Dustin Jack picture. What is your style? What would you say your style is different from, just whomever? Not to compare with whomever, but what would you say your style is? Do you feel like it's defined, or it just happens and it's like, yeah, that's my work?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, but it's also, you have to constantly kind of recreate yourself too, and challenge yourself to not be pigeonholed and not edit the same way, or not shoot from the same angle, or move differently, use a different lens, take a different approach to what you're doing, because if you've seen it before, nobody's going to want to see it again. So, it is a compliment when people have sort of adapted some of my editing style or whatever, and then it's time to reinvent kind of what I'm doing and move on from that style, or try to evolve a little bit more. And the funny thing is, like, I get a lot of like kids and stuff that want to be photographers, and they're like, oh my god, I hope I can be as good as you one day. I go, you were thinking about it completely wrong. Like, you should be better than me. You want to be better than me.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be as good. I'm already me. Be the best you.
Oh, and that's a good point, because I have folks who are, typically either in their early 20s or younger, or people who are, later on in their lives, and they're trying to get much more into photography. And, my message to people pretty consistently is there's not a 5-step plan to become a known or a successful or a working photographer. You have
And
to
it's so
have,
hard now.
right? And I think, you've got to have a style and a perspective that's unique. If all you can do is properly expose pictures, that's wonderful. But that's not going to be the road to a sustainable living, let alone having some sort of notoriety, longevity. You've got to have a voice that is distinctly you. And I think that, nowadays, unfortunately, the whole application, not Photoshop and Lightroom, but simply taking a decently exposed image and slapping a filter on it, that has masqueraded for creativity, when if 50 other people have the same filters,
Same preset, like the Lightroom preset. I'm like, yeah. And in today's world, I mean, when everybody has a camera in their pocket, you better be doing something. And I suggest, to kids all the time, learn how to fly drones, learn the video settings on your camera. DSLR with video capture and slow-mo and stuff like that is, I mean, I wish I would have dug into it a lot earlier in my life, because now nobody just wants a tour photographer. They want a media person.
Yeah,
so it's video, it's flying drones. It is, you have to be able to edit, and you have to be able to edit quickly. And, editing video is not the same as editing a photo. And, and at the end of the show, you have 2 or 3 hours to put a package together, because they're already going to the next town. And by the time people wake up, they need to see what happened last night to get them to the show tonight. So there's no time to fuck around with that kind of pressure and, putting together your package. You better know exactly where you need to end up before you even wake up that day.
And that's a good point. There's a sort of a commonly held belief, and I don't know that it's not true. And the belief is usually that people who are very creative, very artistic, are generally not the same people with a real, I'll call it like a hardcore business mindset. And so just what you just said about, you got to know what the deliverable is, so that after you're creative and it's all wonderful, you better deliver, and you better know what was expected, so you can do it on time or before time and on budget. So, do you see many people, many peers who are able to juggle both of those elements, the business side and the creative? Or do you see a lot of those people who are really great photographers, but maybe they have a colleague who's kind of handling the business side of it, the deliverable side?
I mean, as you know, like when you're done shooting, that's when the work starts.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just the plain truth of it. And that business side of it sucks. It's not my favorite part of it.
It's not glamorous.
I wish I was better at it. I've definitely signed some shitty deals and, made some mistakes, and, but again, in today's world, you have access to, you have no excuse to not learn. Like, the way that we grew up in our age group, I was lucky to, squeeze in half a year at a community college and, take a portrait class so I could get to work. And there was no, you couldn't sit on YouTube all night and learn how to run a business. And now you can, you can learn how to fly a drone. You can learn how to, how to be a concert photographer by watching, you have access to unlimited information now. And we kind of did it the hard way, the film days and, the sort of the heavy lifting, the manual labor side of it, which was the fun side of it, pulling a roll of film through 35 and, advancing it and hearing the shutter and all that stuff. Like I wouldn't trade it for a second. But yeah, I wish I would have learned earlier how to be a better business person and just manage myself a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you learn with experience, making mistakes, maturity, you put it all together and you do learn, especially if you have longevity. You've definitely figured it out to a point where you needed to.
Being good is not good enough anymore. There's too many. It's a dog eat dog. situation, and yeah, I mean, like you said, you have to be an individual and you really have to set yourself apart. And I mean, I'll take that back into to the extent of what I do. That's what I have to do, because there's tons of working photographers out there that don't view it like that. Their job is, if they're, I don't know if they're a paparazzi or if they're working for Getty Images or something, there's a recipe that that they adhere by, and that is a different avenue than I work. Not that it's just different, and just kind of knowing your place and knowing what you're good at, and it makes a difference.
How has social media changed kind of what you do or how you look at your work, and how you get it out there, how it's consumed by potential clients and then, all the people that you want to see it. How has that evolved what you do?
I mean, it's awesome. When I met DJ Ashba, he found me on Instagram and had his manager call me. He's like, "Hey, you want to take a chance and do a photo shoot with DJ Ashba?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's go," and that turned into a 10-year friendship and like very specific collection of work that we've done together, and which led to him introducing me to Nikki, which, I mean, it's just, that happened from Instagram.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's invaluable, and especially with access to so many different photographers. Like, if you're not looking at other people's work and trying to figure out how they're doing stuff, you're missing something, because there's a lot of, back in our day where people would get sort of tiffy with other photographers, and I don't want to look at. Hey, that's how you learn. You learn by looking at other people's work, and there's a lot of good people doing good work, and you can learn something from a guy shooting with his flip phone. It's the tool. It is not. It's the eye and it's the tool. It doesn't really matter where it came from. You can make magic out of people using pinhole cameras and making some magic stuff.
I think the hardest thing to do, I mean, you could spend whatever amount of money you want on equipment and classes and all that kind of stuff, but really the hardest thing, I think, is to have an eye, to understand how to see. And that's
learning light.
Yes.
Light.
Yeah.
Understanding how light falls. That is 90% of what we do.
Yep. Yep. Well, I know that we're going to have a lot of listeners who want to check out your work and follow it and so forth. What are the best ways for people to follow your work and see what you have going on?
The current stuff, probably Instagram, which is just at Dustin Jack Photo. I have just my standard website, which is dustinjackphotography.com. And then I have an online, a print site that you can buy certain prints and stuff, that is shopdustinjackphoto.com. But probably the current, like the one I feed the most is definitely Instagram. Like, if you want to see, what I've done, the most recent is probably Instagram.
Great. Well, Dustin, I can't thank you enough for your generosity of time and hanging out and just sharing, what's been an incredible career so far. And it's you're just rolling. It's not stopping soon.
Same to you, man. I hope hopefully someday we can cross streams and I'll get out there and shoot some sports with you, or we'll go do some wildlife, or just go backpack or something. Go shoot a ghost town together.
Well, I figure between me getting out to LA, which is definitely possible. I don't know if you get back east that often or when you do, but we need to connect. We need to get out and do that. So again, it's an absolute pleasure. I could talk for hours, but I appreciate everything, and we'll definitely be catching up down the road. I definitely want to also let everybody know that they can check out what I have going on. You can take a look online at mitchstringerimages.com. And just like Dustin, you can go to @MitchStringerImages on Instagram. That's probably the best place to see what I have going on day to day, week to week, whether it's sports or it's wildlife or travel or whatever I've got going on. So definitely encourage you to do that. If people have questions, For me, shoot me an email, shoot me a DM. Pretty good about catching up with everybody and circling back to you if you do ask questions. Until next episode, I wish everybody great light, happy shooting, and we'll see you next time.